She was dared to sit on a stranger's lap. Then the black librarian learns he's a Mafia boss. Denise Calloway froze 3 feet from the VIP booth, her heart hammering so loudly she swore the whole club could hear it. Her natural hair was pulled into a tight bun, glasses slightly crooked, hands trembling despite her effort to stay composed. Across from her, a man in a charcoal suit sat perfectly still. A thin scar traced his jaw, and his whiskey-colored eyes held an intensity that made her stomach twist. 31, careful, methodical, Denise had built her life around order, rare books, cataloging, chamomile tea. Tonight, all of that control would be tested. Her friends dared her to sit on a stranger's lap. Legs shaking, she stepped forward and lowered herself onto his laps. The warmth of his body, the steady pressure of his hand on her hip, the quiet authority in his gaze, it made her pulse race. 30 seconds stretched longer than she expected. He didn't ask her to move. He already knew her name. What would you do if a single choice put you face to face with one of the East Coast's most dangerous men? Comment below where you're watching from, hit subscribe for more thrilling stories, and stay tuned. Tomorrow, a new story drops that you won't want to miss. Let's begin. Denise Calloway's life had been built with care, brick by brick, rule by rule. She grew up in Sandtown, Winchester, a neighborhood that had seen better days but still carried the pride of its residents. Her mother disappeared into addiction when Denise was very young, and her father became another statistic of the streets. She was raised by her grandmother, Alma Calloway, in a narrow row house on North Stricker Street. Alma worked tirelessly for wealthy families in Roland Park, scrubbing floors, cooking meals and ironing clothes, but she never failed to nurture a love of learning in her granddaughter. "Books don't leave you, baby girl," Alma said one evening, pressing a library card into Denise's tiny hands. "People will disappoint you. Men will disappoint you. But stories? They stay faithful." Those words became Denise's guiding principle. She studied with purpose, finding solace in pages and reference materials. By the time she graduated high school, her academic record had earned her a scholarship to Morgan State University. From there, she went on to the University of Maryland for her master's in library science. Each achievement reinforced her belief in structure, order, and predictability. She would never rely on chance, never allow chaos to enter her life, never let herself be vulnerable. By 31, Denise had become the head librarian at the historic Enoch Pratt Free Library on Cathedral Street. The building itself was a testament to permanence: marble columns, vaulted ceilings, and the faint, comforting smell of aged paper. It mirrored the life she had carefully curated. Outside work, her Mount Vernon apartment reflected her discipline. Neutral tones filled every room, bookshelves were alphabetized, and a single succulent named Frederick received more conversation than most of her acquaintances. Denise liked it this way. She was safe, invisible, in control. Her routines rarely shifted. Mornings began with chamomile tea and the soft click of her laptop keys. Afternoons were spent cataloging rare acquisitions or overseeing preservation projects. Evenings were quiet, a novel on her lap, Frederick on the windowsill, and the city's distant hum as background music. Her existence was predictable, and she liked it that way. But predictability had its limits. Tamika Reynolds, her best friend since college, was the opposite of Denise in every conceivable way. Confident, outgoing, and unafraid of attention, Tamika thrived in social settings that left Denise exhausted just hearing about them. She worked as a pharmaceutical sales representative, her calendar filled with client dinners, launches, and exclusive events. Where Denise found security in stillness, Tamika sought energy in chaos. Tamika's visits to the library were deliberate invasions of Denise's order. She clicked across the marble floor in designer heels, a whirlwind of motion and enthusiasm. "You're coming out tonight," she announced, leaning against the reference desk. "No excuses." Denise didn't look up immediately. "I have cataloging to finish," she said, fingers tapping the keys. "The Peabody collection arrived this morning, and—" "The books will be here Monday," Tamika interrupted, eyes flashing. You, however, are disappearing from life entirely. When's the last time you went on a date? Denise paused, adjusting her glasses. I went to coffee with that accountant from 2 years ago, Tamika said, cutting her off. 2 years. Denise knew why Tamika persisted. She saw the woman beneath the careful exterior, reserved, soft-spoken, invisible to most of the world. She knew the attention Denise avoided could be dangerous, and yet, it wasn't fear that kept her in the shadows. It was habit, control, a conviction that safety was the highest virtue. Tamika didn't hesitate. Obsidian's opening is tonight. Harbor East. VIP list secured. You will come. Denise blinked. Tamika. 1 night. 3 hours. You can be back home by midnight with your chamomile tea and your Frederick. It was irresistible in a way she refused to admit. Tamika's certainty, the allure of a new space, the subtle promise of something different. Denise felt the pull. She had built walls around herself so high that only Tamika could scale them, and even then, only just enough to make her consider stepping outside them. By evening, Denise found herself outside Obsidian. The warehouse-turned lounge gleamed under dim lighting, black marble floors reflecting crystal chandeliers above. A line of well-dressed patrons formed beyond the velvet ropes, each eager for the exclusivity the night promised. Denise felt her pulse quicken, a small tremor of nerves threading through her usual composure. Tamika nudged her forward. You'll thank me. Denise followed, her steps hesitant but deliberate. In that moment her orderly life, the books, the quiet apartment, the carefully curated solitude, felt a little less sufficient. Something was waiting inside Obsidian, something unaccounted for, and she could not yet name it. She straightened her back, adjusted her glasses, and walked through the entrance. Obsidian's entrance loomed ahead, a black facade glinting faintly under the Harbor East lights. Denise hesitated at the threshold, adjusting her burgundy dress and straightening her glasses. Inside, the club radiated a polished darkness, a contrast of sharp edges and soft illuminations. Black marble floors stretched under the shimmer of crystal chandeliers, and patrons moved with effortless confidence, drinks in hand, laughter low and calculated. Denise felt the weight of their stares, a subtle reminder that she did not belong here. Tamika, naturally at ease, pulled her forward. Relax. You'll see, it's all part of the fun. The music was deep, rhythmic, vibrating through the floor. Denise ordered a drink, a cocktail that glimmered in her hand, and let the first sip warm her tongue. The tension in her shoulders eased, loosened by the third drink, and for the first time in months, she allowed herself a small smile. She danced lightly on her heels, aware of how far outside her usual world she had stepped. The evening shifted when Tamika's Alpha Kappa Alpha sorority sisters arrived. They were magnetic in appearance and presence, moving together with a familiarity Denise had only seen in textbooks about social dynamics. Tamika introduced her, weaving her through the crowd. They circled a plush, low-lit lounge table and before Denise could resist, someone suggested a game of truth or dare. Yolanda, sharp and unyielding in a way that made Denise shrink inward, leaned forward with a knowing glance. When's the last time you did something truly spontaneous? Something that scared you? Denise opened her mouth, searching for an answer. There was none. Her life was carefully controlled, mapped, and catalogued. Spontaneity had been left out intentionally, as though it were dangerous. Her cheeks flushed. The group laughed softly, teasing, and that was when the dare came. Sit on a stranger's lap for 30 seconds. Her mind raced. A stranger? A man she didn't know, possibly dangerous, and yet the dare carried a curious allure. Tamika's eyes urged her forward, confident and insistent. Denise took a shallow breath, nodded, and let herself be led toward the VIP section. A single man sat apart from the crowd, as though the noise of Obsidian could not touch him. His posture was deliberate, composed, a presence that claimed space without demanding attention. Dominic Veretti. Italian heritage marked in his sharp features, dark hair flecked with silver at the temples, the faint line of a scar tracing his jaw. His eyes, deep whiskey-colored, examined the room and landed on her immediately, steady and unwavering. Denise hesitated at the edge of the velvet rope. Her palms were slick, her heart thundering in her chest. She had never expected to be this nervous around anyone, let alone a man who exuded confidence with the weight of unspoken authority. She cleared her throat. I have a dare, she said, voice quiet. To sit on a stranger's lap for 30 seconds. He didn't flinch. He didn't question. He only inclined his head, one word leaving his mouth, sit. Time contracted as she obeyed. The heat of him pressed through the thin fabric of her dress. His cologne, wood, leather, a trace of citrus, settled around her. One hand rested lightly on her hip, the other draped casually across the back of the chair. The music and the chatter seemed to blur into insignificance. For 30 seconds, the world contracted to the warmth and presence of a man who should have been a stranger. You're tense, he said softly, and there was no judgment in his voice. Relax, little librarian. Denise froze at the words. How did he know her title? Her carefully hidden identity? She opened her mouth, but the sound caught in her throat. Denise, he continued, almost conversational, almost intimate. You're cataloging everything in your life, aren't you? Details, rules, routines. Everything safe, everything small. Her lips parted, unsure whether to speak. The words were both unsettling and magnetic. Here was a man who had seen her. Not just her outward appearance, but the order, the care, the invisible walls she had built. The 30 seconds ended, though neither seemed eager to break the spell. He gestured with a measured calm. Leave now. Forget me. Denise stepped back, heart still racing, but something inside her resisted the command. She returned to her friends, who were laughing and oblivious to the tension she carried. She forced herself to smile, to pretend the encounter had been fleeting, a momentary game of courage. Yolanda noticed the distant look in her eyes. Everything okay? Denise nodded, but her mind was elsewhere. She glanced back at the VIP section. He was gone. Just gone. Like a shadow dissipating in the light, leaving only the faintest memory of warmth and intent. The rest of the night passed in a blur. Drinks, laughter, music, all filtered through the persistent echo of those 30 seconds. Denise returned home to her Mount Vernon apartment. Frederick perched on the windowsill, and tried to tell herself it was nothing. A man, a dare, a brief encounter that could not reach beyond the walls of obsidian. She poured chamomile tea, adjusted her bookshelves, and attempted to reclaim the safe rhythm of her life. 3 weeks passed. Work became her anchor once more, cataloging and preservation, the slow satisfaction of ordered existence. Yet, even as she organized rare acquisitions and oversaw the Enoch Pratt collection, the image of him remained. Sharp eyes, commanding presence, and an unsettling awareness of her in ways no one else had ever managed. Every time she thought she had dismissed him, something pulled her back. A memory of the warmth of his hand on her hip, the subtle pressure of his gaze, the quiet authority of a man who could see her completely. Her dreams began to carry fragments of that night, flashes of obsidian, of whiskey-colored eyes, of words she could not forget. Tamika noticed. You're distracted, she said one Tuesday morning, leaning on the edge of Denise's desk. Stop pretending you don't think about him. Denise tried to protest, but no words came. She wasn't just thinking about him, she was remembering what it had felt like to be seen in totality, and the realization was frightening in its intensity. He was more than a stranger now. He had become a question she could not answer, a presence she could not deny, and a memory she could not abandon. Every rule she had followed, every careful choice she had made, felt suddenly insufficient against the gravity of those 30 seconds. The library hummed with quiet life around her, the pages of books rustling faintly in the preserved air. Denise sat at her desk, the hum of fluorescent lights above barely registering. She glanced at Frederick, as if the succulent could advise her, could remind her of safety, of normalcy. The thought was futile. Her mind was elsewhere, and she could not reclaim control. Not entirely, not while the memory of him lingered with such precise clarity. The dare, meant to be a brief escape from order, had planted a seed of unrest. She did not know why a single moment with a man she had never met carried such power, nor could she explain the intensity of the connection. She only knew that her carefully constructed life had shifted, imperceptibly but irreversibly. And in the weeks that followed, Denise realized that the rules she had trusted, the walls she had built, the routines she had clung to, were no longer sufficient to contain the pull of the unknown. She told herself she would forget him. She would rebuild her life around logic, cataloging, safety. She would not allow herself to be swept into uncertainty again. Yet every ordered day brought a reminder of him, a tone in a stranger's laugh that echoed his cadence, a shadow moving across a bookshelf that mirrored the curve of his shoulder, the faint scent of something familiar on the wind as she walked along Cathedral Street. He had entered her world briefly, effortlessly, and left traces she could not erase. Denise, the woman who lived for certainty, found herself wondering if her life had been missing the element she had spent decades avoiding. Unpredictability with a man who could see her completely, whose presence had already claimed space in her mind. The question lingered quietly, persistently. If one encounter could shift everything she thought she knew about control and safety, what might follow if he returned? And though Denise tried to maintain the rhythm of her life, 3 weeks passed without him, leaving only anticipation and the faint ache of a connection she could not rationalize. She worked, organized, catalogued, and adjusted her carefully curated world, yet the memory of that night remained as vivid as if it had happened yesterday. The library's day began like any other, the quiet hum of activity punctuated by the turning of pages and the soft footsteps of patrons exploring the rare collection. Denise moved with precision among the shelves, checking the placement of newly catalogued acquisitions, ensuring nothing disturbed the order she had so meticulously maintained. Her eyes lingered on a first edition of Langston Hughes, the spine worn, the pages yellowed with age, and she traced the title with a gentle fingertip, feeling a sense of reverence she reserved for stories alone. A call from the library director disrupted her routine. "Denise, you're needed in the director's office. There's an urgent matter regarding a donation." Curiosity prickled at her chest as she followed the narrow corridor to the office. The director, a man she trusted implicitly, gestured to the paperwork on his desk. "We've received an anonymous donation, $2 million worth of rare African-American first editions. Langston Hughes, Zora Neale Hurston, James Baldwin. You'll oversee the private tour and catalog them personally." Denise's pulse quickened. Rare collections were her domain, her life's work, but the scale of this donation was extraordinary. She glanced at the request form and noted the signature, or lack thereof, completely anonymous, yet insisting on a private tour after public hours. Her pulse faltered briefly. There was something about the specificity, the care with which this had been arranged. Something deliberate. That evening, the library emptied of patrons, the dimmed lights casting soft reflections across the polished wood floors. Denise walked to the preservation vault, a secure chamber where the rarest pieces were kept. The silence of the space was comforting in a way. It allowed her to focus entirely on her work, on the order she controlled. And then, without a warning, the door opened. Denise froze. 2 men in dark suits entered first, their expressions unreadable, efficient. Behind them, he walked, Dominic Veretti. His gaze found hers immediately, unwavering and knowing. He had not entered casually, nor had he arrived by chance. The recognition in his eyes, the careful attention to every detail of the room, spoke to an intention that was impossible to ignore. Denise's breath caught as he stepped closer, extending a hand and placing a business card on the preservation table. "Dominic Veretti, import-export," he said. The words were measured, deliberate. Denise read them and understood instantly. The guise of business was only a cover. The history, the reputation, the danger were all implied, all present in the simple phrasing. "I expected discretion," she said softly, trying to mask the tremor in her voice. "I did not expect you." He allowed a thin smile, one that carried both charm and command. "You sat in my lap, Denise. You started this." The statement was matter of fact, devoid of malice yet weighted with significance. Denise swallowed, uncertain whether to be angry, afraid, or captivated. "I tried to leave you alone," he continued, his tone shifting. "I tried, truly. But I became obsessed. The librarian who threw herself at a stranger because she was tired of being invisible, it fascinated me." Denise's heart beat fast, the familiar rhythm of control faltering under his gaze. He had watched her, observed her, seen her in ways no one else had. The dare, which she had thought fleeting, had become a pivot, a shift that she could no longer deny. Dominic extended a quiet invitation, his words casual yet loaded. "One dinner. Complete honesty. After that, you decide if this continues." She nodded, the decision less calculated than she would have admitted. The allure of understanding him, of stepping beyond the predictable boundaries of her life, overrode hesitation. The following evening, the Charleston restaurant awaited them, a private room overlooking the harbor. Candles flickered across the polished surface of the table, the aroma of fine cuisine filling the space. Every detail spoke to his wealth, his taste, and the careful orchestration of this encounter. Denise felt simultaneously out of place and precisely where she needed to be. Over the meal, Dominic spoke of himself in measured fragments. 3 generations of organized crime in Philadelphia. Expansion along the eastern seaboard. Now Baltimore. He outlined the scope without glamour, without self-justification. No direct hits ordered. No drugs. No human trafficking, he said, almost conversationally. "I am not a good man, Denise. You should leave." Yet, as he spoke, as he revealed layers of truth she had never imagined, Denise felt an unexpected clarity. Here was danger, undeniable and raw, but also presence, intelligence, and a force that defied avoidance. She knew she should run. Every fiber of her cautious existence screamed it. Instead, she remained. She listened, questioned, probed, and gradually understood that his world, though dark and complex, carried its own rules. She made her choice in the quiet spaces between words and silences. From that night forward, her life shifted. Black roses appeared at the library, discreetly placed where she would notice them. Drivers arrived at her apartment, carefully informed about her schedule, her habits, her preferences. He learned her rituals as much as she began to observe his. There was poetry when he could not sleep, 4 languages mastered with precision, a scar marking a bullet wound, Sunday visits to his mother's grave in Philadelphia. Each revelation was a layer of intimacy, dangerous and consuming. Dominic's honesty extended into the shadows she had resisted. "I had a man killed last month," he admitted quietly, the weight of the statement undiminished. "He embezzled from a children's hospital we fund." Her grandmother's voice rose in memory, warning, guiding, threatening caution, yet the force of Dominic's presence made resistance nearly impossible. The librarian who had once catalogued every aspect of her life found herself cataloguing him instead, tracing patterns, noting contradictions, and being drawn in further with each observation. She whispered one night, almost to herself, "I should leave." He did not respond immediately. There was no pressure, no coercion, only a quiet certainty in his gaze that held her in place. The air between them was charged with possibility, desire, and danger. Neither moved, neither spoke, yet the world outside the preservation of their moment existed only as a faint echo. With the approach of winter, the intimacy deepened. They moved with shared knowledge, unspoken understanding, and a calculated rhythm of proximity. Dominic's enemies, always watching, became part of the awareness Denise could not ignore. Threats, observations, the subtle tension of being constantly observed, these were now components of her existence. Yet she did not retreat. Each encounter, each revelation, drew her further into a life she had once avoided, a life that challenged her meticulously ordered world. She catalogued his nuances, traced the origins of his decisions, and in doing so, discovered her own capacity for risk, for engagement, for presence. Every black rose, every driver, every whispered confession became part of the architecture of a connection neither of them could easily define. She learned to navigate his power with intellect and caution, but also with curiosity and a growing recognition that her life had been hollow without this intensity. By the time snow edged the city, their partnership had evolved. Denise was no longer merely a librarian cataloging books. She was a participant in a world defined by rules she could not entirely control, yet understood enough to survive. Dominic, in turn, revealed himself as more than a force of threat. He was complexity, contradiction, and obsession, and he recognized in her something that challenged and complemented him in equal measure. The revelation was complete. The man who had once been a stranger in a nightclub was now an integral presence in her life. The risk, the danger, and the intimacy had become inseparable from her daily existence. Each day demanded decisions, each encounter tested boundaries, each revelation carried the weight of potential loss. Yet in this descent, Denise found an unexpected equilibrium. She catalogued not only books but moments, gestures, patterns. She catalogued him. And through that, she began to understand herself in ways she had never imagined possible. Winter had settled over Baltimore, the harbor gray and cold, the streets slick with occasional rain. Denise had grown accustomed to the rhythms of her life with Dominic, the controlled chaos, the constant awareness, the delicate balance between ordinary routines and extraordinary danger. But nothing could have prepared her for the first message that this balance was fragile. She returned to her Mount Vernon apartment one evening to find the door ajar. The interior was a wreck. Books lay strewn across the floor, their pages torn and smudged. Furniture was overturned, glass from broken frames glimmered across the carpet. On the far wall, in letters of red paint, a simple threat: "He can't protect you." Shock gave way to anger, fear laced with disbelief. She called Dominic immediately. When he arrived, he moved through the apartment with calm precision, surveying the damage without flinching. His presence was both terrifying and protective, a stark reminder of the world she had willingly entered. "You have to move in with me," he said, his voice steady, leaving no room for argument. "Alone, you are vulnerable." Denise's temper ignited. "I am not yours to control. I have my own life, my own rules. I won't just hand over my autonomy." Dominic's gaze met hers, unwavering. "You were a ghost before, haunting a library, counting the days until you disappeared entirely. I gave you a reason to exist. Do you think this life you led, silent, cautious, invisible, was truly living?" Her voice faltered despite her anger. He was not wrong. Her life had been safe, yes, orderly, yes, predictable in ways that had dulled her spirit. And yet, the thought of surrendering fully to him, of relinquishing control, unsettled her. After hours of argument, she realized that staying in her apartment was no longer an option. She packed her essentials and left behind the home she had built with quiet discipline. Moving into Dominic's penthouse was like stepping into another world. Security was tight, personnel always nearby, and technology ensured she could never be caught off guard. For the first time, Denise felt the weight of being watched, of existing under protection. It would have been suffocating if she had allowed it to be. Instead, she made a choice. She would not be passive. "Teach me," she said one evening, her voice firm. "If I am to be part of this world, I need to understand it, not just exist within it." Dominic studied her, the corner of his mouth lifting slightly. "Very well," he said, and he began to guide her. Over the following months, Denise learned to read patterns, recognize the subtle movements of men who operated with purpose, and trace inconsistencies where others overlooked them. Her librarian's mind, trained to notice the smallest details, became invaluable. She found hidden accounts, traced property records, and pieced together the rival network's financial structures without ever stepping into direct danger. Dominic's respect for her grew with each revelation. "You're remarkable," he admitted one night. "I should have recruited you years ago." "I'm not one of your employees," she replied. "No," he said softly. "You are something far more dangerous." The tension with the New York crime family escalated quietly at first, subtle threats, surveillance, and hints that Dominic's expansion was being contested. The war never came to Denise directly. She never saw the violence, never stood in the shadows of bloodshed, but she saw its impact reflected in Dominic's eyes. Controlled anger, strategic calculation, a burden he bore as he protected everything he had built, and now her. Gray February mornings became a canvas for difficult conversations. One day, Dominic presented her with an offer that would have changed everything. He could provide a new identity, relocation anywhere in the world, enough wealth to disappear completely. Freedom was tangible, within reach. "I can't ask you to stay," he said. "I've dragged you into a world you never asked for. I won't demand it." Denise looked at him, memories of her grandmother whispering warnings at the edge of her mind, the girl she had been, the woman she had become. Her answer was deliberate, unshaken. "I'm not leaving," she said. Dominic's expression softened, but the intensity in his gaze remained. "Then tell me what you want," he said. "I want to stop being safe," she said, her voice steady. "I want to feel alive. I want you, Dominic, the darkness and the light." A quiet moment passed, the kind of silence that carried understanding beyond words. Then he stepped forward, pulled her close. "Then you have me. God help you, you have me." Living with Dominic was not easy. It was not romanticized in the way her previous life had allowed her imagination to wander. There were fights, arguments over control, moments when Denise's desire for independence clashed with Dominic's insistence on security. Yet, for every conflict, there were moments of connection that left her heart steady and full. They learned each other's rhythms. She came to understand his decisions, his instincts, the logic behind his world of organized power. He, in turn, began to trust her judgment, valuing her mind as much as her presence. By the time the winter thawed into early spring, Denise realized how profoundly she had changed. She was no longer invisible, no longer cautious to the point of paralysis. She had discovered courage, strategy, and the willingness to embrace a life that carried risk along with reward. The war with New York concluded, blood marking its passage, but Denise measured the outcome not by the violence itself, but by the changes it brought within Dominic's eyes, the depth of his respect for her participation in matters he once bore alone. Her choice had been clear, though difficult. Safety had offered her a life of quietude. Intimacy with Dominic demanded courage, vulnerability, and intelligence. The decision to remain was not surrender, it was affirmation. The city began to bloom around them, spring lifting the weight of winter. Baltimore felt different, as if the air itself had shifted to accommodate the life Denise had chosen. Together, they walked the streets with the knowledge of danger and the assurance of mutual understanding. In this new rhythm, Denise continued to refine her role in Dominic's world. She was neither subordinate nor passive. She asked questions, offered insight, and navigated the complexities of his empire with a clarity that surprised even him. Her days were structured yet unpredictable, filled with the subtleties of power, the attention to detail, and the rare moments of unguarded intimacy. Dominic never demanded she conform entirely to his world. Instead, he measured her capabilities, recognized her courage, and acknowledged her mind as a partner's mind, rather than an assistant's. Through months of shared vigilance and strategy, Denise proved herself indispensable, not just by presence but through intellect. The war with the New York faction, while concluded, left traces of tension and caution. The city's streets, the offices, and the hidden networks all bore the marks of conflict, and Denise absorbed every lesson, every observation, every calculated risk. She had moved from a spectator to an active participant, balancing danger with insight, desire with awareness. Her final affirmation came quietly on a cold February morning, as she stood beside Dominic overlooking the harbor. He spoke no words of command, no reminders of what she had left behind. Instead, he offered choice, trust, and acknowledgement. Her decision, already made, reflected not surrender but agency, courage, and a refusal to let fear dictate the boundaries of her life. She had stepped fully into the unknown, embraced the intensity, and claimed a life that demanded both intellect and instinct. With Dominic, she was no longer invisible. She was present, active, and profoundly alive. The winter of threats, destroyed apartments, and violent tension had not broken her. It had revealed her capacity to act decisively, to navigate danger with clarity, and to claim the life she wanted, not the one dictated by fear, caution, or routine. Together, they stood at the threshold of spring, a season of renewal and growth. Baltimore itself seemed to reflect their transformation. She had chosen courage over comfort, engagement over distance, and life over careful survival. Dominic's hand found hers, a simple gesture of possession, trust, and partnership. "Are you certain?" he asked quietly, the depth of his voice matched only by the weight of the world around them. Denise turned her gaze to the harbor, to the rising sun glinting off the water, to the city she had always known yet now experienced anew. "I am," she said. "I want all of it. The risk, the intensity, the danger, the light. All of it." He drew her close, the space between them dissolving into quiet understanding. "Then you have me," he said. "God help you, you have me." The city awoke around them, but their world, their choices, and their lives had already shifted, irrevocably and intentionally. Spring arrived in Baltimore like a quiet promise. Cherry blossoms lined the streets near the inner harbor, petals drifting lazily onto sidewalks as if marking the city for a fresh beginning. Denise walked past the familiar streets toward the Enoch Pratt Free Library, a subtle smile tugging at her lips. She had returned not merely as a librarian, but as the director of a new initiative dedicated to preserving and showcasing the African American collection, funded by an anonymous donor who recognized the value she had long defended. Her Mount Vernon apartment had changed little. Cardigans remained her armor. Frederick, too, the succulent she spoke to more often than people, sat by the window, and the methodical order of her books offered comfort. Yet Denise herself had changed. She still revered stories, still trusted their faithfulness, but she had discovered a love that existed beyond the pages. After work, Dominic's dark car waited for her on Cathedral Street. The ride was filled with conversation and debate, their voices mingling and overlapping, reflecting the differences they had come to accept. Arguments over trivial matters gave way to laughter, then to quiet intensity, and eventually to the physical connection that grounded them both. Time felt suspended, hours passed unnoticed as the night drew on, leaving only shared presence and whispered confidences. It was not a fairy tale. Dominic remained a man of calculated power, shadows trailing him in ways Denise had learned to navigate. She remained a woman of books, careful thoughts, and measured steps. And yet, together, they had forged something that transcended definitions, dangerous, dark, and real. A life built not on compromise, but on balance, each giving weight and space, each trusting the other to maintain the rhythm of the world they shared. One evening, they stood watching the sun lower itself over the inner harbor, casting golden reflections across the water. Dominic's voice broke the quiet. "I never thanked you for seeing me that night," he said. Denise turned to him, studying his expression, aware of the faint scar at his jaw and the depth in his whiskey-colored eyes. "Seeing you?" she asked softly. "You made it impossible to look away," he replied. "You sat on my lap like it was the bravest thing you'd ever done. And I thought, this woman is going to ruin me." A smile curved her lips, warmth spreading through her chest. "Did I?" "Completely. Utterly. Magnificently," he said, his hand brushing against hers. For the first time in her life, Denise did not wish to fade into the background. She did not wish to be unseen, unnoticed, or restrained. She had chosen a life of presence, intensity, and risk, and in doing so had discovered that some connections, though unpredictable and demanding, could illuminate more than any story on a shelf ever could. Together, they lingered by the harbor, the city alive around them, knowing they had arrived at a chapter neither had expected but both had earned. Denise's journey was a testament to the quiet courage that often goes unnoticed. For years, she had measured her life by rules, by routines, by the safety of predictability. Every decision had been cautious, every risk calculated, every desire tempered by fear. Her walls had been built carefully, brick by brick, a structure meant to shield her from disappointment, from danger, from the uncontrollable. Her grandmother's voice, once a comforting guide, had become a quiet echo of restraint. Books don't leave you, baby girl. People will disappoint you. Men will disappoint you. But stories? They stay faithful. Denise had trusted those words, leaning on stories as her constant companions, yet she had sacrificed herself in the process. Safety had become her prison, and the slow rhythm of her invisible life had numbed her to possibility. The dare that night at Obsidian had been more than a game. It had been a permission slip, an opening to want, to risk, to feel something beyond caution. Sitting on Dominic's lap had been a momentary choice, yet it had sparked a series of choices that pulled her out of isolation and into the uncertainty of connection. Through him, she discovered that a life without danger can also be a life without joy, that measured steps are not always protective, they can be confining. Love, she realized, is not about seeking perfection. It is about recognizing value, about finding someone whose presence demands courage, whose truth requires vulnerability, whose intensity is worth stepping into even when fear insists otherwise. Denise learned that the unknown is not to be feared endlessly. It is to be navigated, explored, and sometimes embraced. For the quiet ones, the careful ones, the invisible ones, Denise's story carries a lesson. Permission to exist fully, to take risks, to let the world in, is not a gift, it is a choice. Each moment of hesitation is an opportunity to ask, what am I protecting myself from? What am I sacrificing in the name of safety? Caution becomes cowardice only when it prevents life from happening. Her life with Dominic was not a fantasy, nor was it without peril. It was intense, demanding, and sometimes overwhelming. And yet, in the giving and receiving of trust, in the confrontation of fear and desire, Denise found the depth she had been missing in the quiet corridors of libraries and the structured days of her solitary life. She understood that living truly requires stepping into the unknown, that each choice, each risk, each heartbeat that defies the measured pace of safety, is a story worth telling. Denise's lesson extends beyond romance or danger. It is about presence, about embracing the complexity of human experience, about acknowledging that fear can coexist with joy, and that sometimes the bravest act is to say yes, to a person, to a moment, to a life uncontained. Her story invites the careful, the hesitant, and the invisible to find their own permission to move forward, to seek connection, and to recognize that the world, unpredictable as it is, may hold rewards worth the leap. Denise had spent her life believing that books were the only love that could never fail her. They were precise, reliable, and safe. Yet through the choices she made, she discovered that human connection, messy, unpredictable, and intense, could be just as enduring, and in ways more profound. The librarian who had once measured her life by rules and routine realized that living fully required more than caution. It demanded presence, courage, and the willingness to be seen. Sometimes, the most powerful stories are not bound in leather or printed on pages. They unfold in the decisions we dare to make, in the moments when we step beyond fear, and in the connections we allow ourselves to nurture. Denise chose passion over safety, love over isolation, and presence over invisibility. She embraced the unknown, not because it was safe, but because it was real. The question is not whether her choices were right or wrong, that is for each person to answer for themselves. The question is whether we ourselves have the courage to act when opportunity and risk collide. Will we remain in the comfort of familiarity, or will we allow ourselves the chance to engage with life in all its unpredictability? Denise's story leaves a clear invitation, to step forward, to take risks, and to accept that the most meaningful experiences often arrive when we venture into the unknown. Sometimes, the only way to truly live is to sit on the stranger's lap and see where the moment leads. Thank you for staying with us until the end. We want to hear from you. Have you ever taken a risk that completely changed your life? Share your story in the comments below and tell us where you are watching from. If this story captured your attention, make sure to hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications so you won't miss our next story. Tomorrow, we are bringing another powerful tale that will keep you on the edge of your seat and leave you thinking long after it ends. Your support makes these stories possible. By being part of this community, you help us continue sharing moments of courage, passion, and transformation. Until next time, Keep choosing to live boldly and embrace the moments that challenge you. Those are the stories worth telling.